Hello, hi, I'm Claudio Pinhanes, and this is the Perspectives in AI seminar. This is a seminar that we have here in Brazil. This is hosted by the Center for Artificial Intelligence. This is a partnership of IBM, USP, and FAPESP to advance artificial intelligence in Brazil. Every month we invite some top scientists in AI to talk about where the field is going, what kind of interesting research and technology they're working on. Today we have the pleasure to have Professor Pattie Maes from the MIT Media Lab. Welcome to our seminars, Pattie. So Pattie has been a faculty for many years at MIT. I know her for more than 20 years now, and I have to say, I think it's very rare to find someone in AI, someone who had such a broad impact in so many different areas. I mean, you have done work on agents, very seminal work on agents. You have done work on ratings. I mean, some of the first rating systems. You're doing incredible work that you're going to talk about in terms of AI-based interfaces and cognitive augmentation. And on top of that, I also have to say, Pat has a lot of experience as an entrepreneur. She co-founded many companies. I mean, some of them she successfully sold, exited, did the whole path. So that's quite amazing. So without much more, I'd like to give as much time as possible for her to talk about what she's doing. And for people in our YouTube feed, first, thank you for being here. Second, please post questions. We are going to select the ones that people find more interesting, and at the end of this conversation, we'll bring that to Pattie. Again, Pattie, thank you so much for being here. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Claudio, and it's a pleasure to be here. We have had many really amazingly creative and accomplished students from Brazil at our graduate program at the MIT Media Lab. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I hope that maybe with this presentation I can encourage some of you, or maybe friends of yours, to maybe apply to join us at our program. So my work these days lies at the intersection of artificial intelligence and human-computer interaction, and I'm specifically interested in enhancing human cognition or enhancing human intelligence rather than reproducing intelligence in machines. So that's what I'll talk about today. So today's devices, our cell phones and other wearable and portable devices, put the world's information at our fingertips, but actually they don't always affect our performance and our well-being in a positive way. There are many studies that have come out in the last 5 years or so that show that smartphones and other devices are changing the way we think. They are making us less creative, less able to relate to other people, less able to solve problems, and many other issues have been brought up in all of these user studies. There's a lot of negative effects on our mental, physical, and emotional well-being. So in my group, for the last probably 8 years or so, we have been thinking about whether devices could help us with learning, with performance, with self-development. Could devices actually help us with these things, these areas where they are currently not having such a great impact. Everybody, all of us, want to change or improve or grow in some ways. Maybe we want to get rid of some bad habits that we have and develop healthier and better habits. We may want to improve our ability to focus and remain focused. We may want to learn more effectively, become better communicators, be less controlled by our emotions, make more rational decisions, or at times maybe be more creative and make more irrational decisions. And current solutions for self-help and for personal growth are really far from perfect. Today, if you want to change in one of those ways, you have a couple of options. You can read a book or watch a video lecture, or maybe go see a therapist or a coach who can help you with these things. Or maybe some people resort to medicine, for example, to be more focused and so on. And none of these current solutions are perfect. In fact, they have lots of side effects. They can be expensive. They are hard to implement, and it's hard to implement advice that a coach may give you, and so on. So I have been interested in my research group at MIT in this question of whether we can design new wearable and portable systems that can help people thrive. Wearables and mobile systems that can support cognitive skills such as attention, creativity, learning, decision-making, communication, and more. And our approach these days consists of the following process. Typically, we start from some insights from psychology or neuroscience about how people think or act and behave, and that inspires a new wearable or portable device that can monitor and enhance some cognitive skill in the wild. And typically, by the way, when we build our technologies, the main ingredients are sensors for data collection and artificial intelligence techniques for basically analyzing the data. And then we issue interventions of some sort that can help the person with whatever the cognitive skill is that they need help with. And these new devices that we build, these new solutions that we create, they typically enable new opportunities for doing studies, or also new products, new commercial products and new services that may exist that can help people with those issues that I previously mentioned. So ultimately, the circle gets completed, and this may result in new insights for neuroscience and psychology, because we are building these systems that can not just observe and collect data about people in the wild, but also experiment in a way with interventions that may help them with a particular issue. And again, that can lead to certain insights, new insights, because this type of experiment has previously not been possible. So here's some examples of these devices that we built, and I will talk about each of these in the remainder, or about most of these in the remainder of our lecture. But typically they're just simple devices, wearable devices that are fairly cheap to manufacture and that can be used by people in daily life, or at least in the home setting. So typically the systems that we built do some real-time sensing, either through physiological sensors or brain-computer sensors, voice, and other elements. And then the system analyzes all that data that is collected about the person's current state, and analyzes it and issues some real-time intervention or real-time feedback to the person, which can be, again, taking a variety of forms, such as audio feedback, tactile, symbolic, temperature, scent. We've used all of those. And then you can, of course, notice whether that real-time intervention had an impact by, again, noticing how the sensor data change because of that intervention. So that's sort of the process that we engage in for a lot of our work. Let me make all of this a little bit more concrete. Take attention. All of us these days have trouble, especially now that we're sitting at a computer all day long in Zoom calls. We all have problems with remaining attentive on some external stimulus, for example, me talking right now. And so we have been working for now 4 years, actually, on a biofeedback system that collects information from the brain using EEG to collect brainwave activity, as well as EOG, which is the movement of the eyes, basically. We have built a system in the form factor of a pair of glasses, which you see on the left and right. So these glasses are totally wireless, and they have all the sensors and the processing built in. There are 2 sensors on the nose that can measure the movement of the eyes, and there are sensors behind the ears that pick up EEG or brainwave activity. The system also has Bluetooth and some ways of giving output or feedback to the person through sound or through haptics. And we use this system in a whole variety of studies to date to show that we can basically monitor when a person is being attentive to an external source and give them feedback if they want to, if they are basically less attentive. We can give them feedback in a haptic form or through sound to sort of encourage them to be attentive again. Of course, the idea is that people would voluntarily choose to wear these glasses, for example, when they're attending a lecture, like right now, rather than that this would be imposed by somebody externally who wants that person to be attentive. We published a number of experiments. One of them is about how this improves learning. So we, at the Media Lab, did studies where a number of people would all wear the glasses or a previous version of the system. And a third of the group would get biofeedback every time their attention was below a certain threshold. They would hear a sound, basically. A second group would just get random feedback at different times, and a third group did not get any feedback at all. So you see here on the right, in blue, the biofeedback group, in orange, the no feedback group, and in gray, the random feedback group. And these are 3 different subsequent experiments that we did with the same group of people, where they were sitting for an hour listening to a fairly complicated scientific lecture. And we gave people a quiz at the end of the lecture and noticed, and this is the number of questions that people basically answered correctly, or how they scored on the quiz at the end of the hour based on which group they were in. And so you can see that the group that got biofeedback, that was told to pay attention every time their attention drifted, we did much better than the group that got random feedback, which also did better than the group that got no feedback at all. We also evaluated the same system in a car setting, where we basically had a simulator donated to us by a car company. And people were asked in the middle of the night to come to the Media Lab and do these driving tests for an hour in the simulator. And the same glasses would basically again be used to pick up fatigue level. And the people who received the feedback every time their fatigue was setting in, basically again did better, and the system basically made them be more alert on average because of the feedback that they received. We've also done a lot of work on memory and learning. If you think about it, today's interfaces and lectures and so on are not necessarily designed based on what we know about how people learn and what some methods are that are more effective for helping people memorize new information. So one idea, for example, that we have experimented with is that you may know that there's sort of different types of memory that people have. We have more factual memory and more episodic memories. And factual memories are for remembering facts. And episodic memories are for remembering entire sort of episodes or things that happened, basically. And people also have special abilities for spatial memorization of things. And some of scientists have actually shown that we even have special neurons, space cells, that help us with spatial memory. And we decided to build a system that makes it possible for a person to memorize a set of facts by basically connecting them to their spatial memory mechanisms rather than using their factual memories for learning these facts. So the set of facts that we chose was pretty random, was the winners of the Super Bowl for 30 consecutive years in the United States, which is sort of like soccer, the winners of the World Cup in soccer or something for Brazil, I guess. What we did was we used augmented reality glasses to let a person or to teach a person about the winners of the Super Bowl each year, the subsequent succession basically of winners. We let them experience that using augmented reality. So a person would just go from the subway to their office at the Media Lab, and on the way, on that route basically from the subway station to their office in the Media Lab, we would show them virtual images that were superimposed on their real visual field. So for example, when they just come out of the train, on the upper left, they see a guy with boxes who's not physically there, who is added in their visual field to represent the Green Bay Packers, which is the team that won in '67. Then when they go up the escalator to go outside, they again see a guy with boxes because the next year, again, the Green Bay Packers won. In '69, the New York Jets won. So as soon as the person comes out of the subway, they see a jet parked on the street right there when they come out of the subway. They then go to past the medical building where they see an Indian chief sitting on the steps to represent the Kansas City Chiefs, and so on. So they basically experience all these basically augmentations to their visual scenery as they just walk from the subway to their office to go to work. And I think here you'll see one of our users testing the subject. So the Miami Dolphins, for example, are shown in the elevator. And it turns out that by doing so, it basically, a person only has to experience once this system and all these images projected sort of onto their visual field as they use this familiar route. And they can basically remember this set of facts for a very long time, and their memory and their recall rate does not degrade or barely degrades. So we compared this with people who tested, who basically practiced and rehearsed and memorized the same set of facts on paper for the same amount of time. And initially, both groups did equally well. So the people who used our system, the Nevermind system, they did as well as the people who used the paper-based studying method. But already 1 day later, the people who studied the material on paper had forgotten half of the facts, while the group that used our augmented reality system still had pretty much the same performance. And it turns out that we didn't publish it in that same paper, but that even weeks and months later, the group that used our augmented reality system could still recall the set of winners, because in their mind, they had basically used a more episodic and more spatial mechanism to remember these same facts, and they can just rethink or reimagine and re-experience their walk from the train station to their office to recreate the different winners for the different years. So I think there's a lot of potential like that for using facts that we know about how the human mind works, and to use those to help people with tasks like memorization and learning. A related experiment that we just completed, actually, that my student Judith Amoris worked on, is the use of a technique called targeted memory reactivation during sleep to help a person with memory consolidation, or to help a person with improving their memory and their learning rate. It turns out that for a long time, actually, psychologists have been doing experiments to see whether we can influence memory and learning during sleep. The way they do this is they basically associate either a certain sound or a certain smell with learning something. And then at night, during slow wave sleep, which is one of our sleep stages that we all go through several times a night, they reproduce that same sound or smell. And that results in the person doing better on memory tests of that same material in the morning than people who just get a totally different smell or no smell at all. Typically, though, these sleep studies and this whole method is called targeted memory reactivation. They require that a person wears all this equipment, a polysomnography machine, it's called, which collects data about their heart rate and breathing rate, and again, their brainwave activity or EEG. They also have to wear what you see on the right, an olfactometer, which is a very a device that can, in very controlled quantities, give you a certain scent, let you smell a certain scent at a certain time. And this whole setup is incredibly expensive and requires a sleep technician to be there all night watching the person to make sure that none of the wires come loose and so on. It happens in sleep labs and is very complicated, and as such has not resulted in any kind of systems that you or I could be using in a home setting to improve our memory. So Judith Amoris, my student, has been building this system that just uses a very simple band, the Muse sleep monitoring system, for sensing the sleep stages. And she built a scent delivery system that you see on the right there, that can, in very, again, precise quantities, release a certain scent based on the physiological data and the sleep stages that the person is in. And she basically just reproduced one of these famous studies that shows that you can basically influence and improve learning at night by doing this technique of producing or associating the scent while the person is studying something during the day, like you see in the picture here. They are wearing the scent delivery device around their neck. And then the same system is used at night, which you see on the left here, where the system will basically produce a certain, the same scent during slow wave sleep. And Judith just did this whole study to show, and within subject study, to show that the same group of people, if they have to learn the locations and the translations, which you see on the right here, of a number of objects in a language that you're not familiar with, in this case Spanish, the same group of people basically does a lot better in memorization and recall rate of those objects and their locations than a control group who just have water and so the system doesn't produce a particular scent that it associates with the task. Creativity is another area that we have been working on. One of my students, Adam Horowitz, and another one, Abby Jane, were very inspired by another phenomenon that they had heard about from psychologists, which is that of hypnagogic dreams. Basically, a number of scientists and artists, including Tesla, Edison, Dali, Einstein, and others, they all have been using this technique to be creative, which is sometimes referred to as the steel ball technique. And in fact, Thomas Edison, who's of course one of the great inventors of all times, is even portrayed with that steel ball in his hand in this sculpture in his hometown. And the technique basically consists of leveraging the dreams that happen when you just start falling asleep to allow you to be creative about a particular problem that you want to be creative about. So Salvador Dali actually credits that picture on the left that he drew, that he painted, with being the result of one of these experiments. And there are many scientists that have basically conveyed that some of their insights, even a Nobel Prize winner, came to them in these types of dreams using this technique. The way these artists and scientists would use this technique is that they let themselves fall asleep with a heavy object in their hand, like a steel ball or a fork or whatever. And they force themselves to think about a particular problem or a particular topic right before falling asleep. And then as soon, of course, that you fall asleep, the ball gets dropped because your muscles relax, which wakes the person up. And then the person tries to immediately capture the thoughts that they have in their mind, which tend to be about the same topic or problem that you sort of forced yourself to think about right before you were falling asleep. So hypnagogia really happens at the onset of sleep. It is really when people transition into from being awake to the first stage of sleep. And one of the interesting things about this sleep stage is that people are still a little bit awake. So you can actually talk to a person when they are in that stage of sleep, but they don't make all that much sense, basically, because their prefrontal cortex is already shut down pretty much for the sleep. And so their thinking tends to be a lot more less logical. So this is what our device looks like. We basically built a device and an app that makes it a lot easier and more reliable to use this technique to influence these little dreams that you have when you just fall asleep. So we have an app that where you can record a prompt that will be spoken to you as you fall asleep. So the system, the app will tell you, remember to think about rabbits or whatever it is that you want to think about as you are falling asleep. And we have a glove sensor that you see on the left bottom that detects when the person is entering sleep based on heart rate and EDA, and also whether their muscles are relaxed or not. And as you fall asleep, basically, the system talks to you, reminds you what to think about. It then lets you sleep for a short amount of time, but then wakes you up and asks you to report what your dream was. And it doesn't necessarily wake you up completely. It basically just talks to you as you are in this weird in-between state and asks you and records the dream that you are basically experiencing. So we have a whole paradigm that makes it easy to use this technique several times in a row, and that is a lot more reliable than just using a steel ball. Here's a video that I'll show next of one of these dreams that we captured. And the BBC actually did a story on our work and visualized what the person was saying about what they see. But our dream reports that the app basically records are just voice-based.
There's speech about a fork. Monkeys holding it.
The prompt was fork in this case.
The agent is using a fork to go into headquarters, and a child picks it up and throws it to a bird. And the fork is run under a sink. And there's a maze in the fork. And they're on the moon.
So you get the idea. We just published a journal article on this actually that shows that we can basically influence and record the dream that the person has, and that if we give them a particular prompt, people are indeed more likely to have a dream about that topic than if we don't give them a prompt like that. And we also have shown augmented creativity. We ask people, we give people a test after they experience this and ask them to come up with alternative uses for the object in question, like fork, or we used tree, we've used rabbit, a whole number of prompts. And we showed that the people who use this system and who sleep and have these micro dreams where they are influenced to think about the prompt, the topic, that they actually come up with more alternative uses or show more creativity related to the problem at hand than people who can just rest for a while, for example, or sleep for a while, but without having the dreams about that particular prompt. We are also working on decision making. Basically, all of us these days are sort of bombarded by advertisements. Maybe there's political debates and ads and so on, or at business meetings, somebody may try to convince you of something. And we thought, well, what if we build a system that teaches you to be more critical about the statements that you are hearing and whether you should believe those or not? So we actually used some of IBM's argument mining and classification technology, and had a set of statements that person was listening to, and we had basically an AI system that would listen to the same statements at the same time. And we asked the AI system would basically listen to these statements and tell the person either that the statement seemed to be supported by evidence, or it would tell them that it was supported by evidence and what the evidence was. And we compared 3 different conditions. In one condition, the device was turned off. People just, and by the way, we happen to use this set of glasses that is a commercial product made by Bose that has a speaker and a microphone embedded in it. So the person gets the advice from the wearable reasoner, as we call the system, basically spoken right next to their ear, but they can still, it doesn't block their hearing. So in one condition, the device is turned off. You don't hear anything. In a second condition, which we call the non-explainable AI, the system just says this is supported, this statement, or not supported. And in a third condition, we use an explainable AI, and the system supports or says why the statement is supported or not supported. And we did a whole set of experiments again with subjects, and we showed that when people have this reasoner that helps them think about the statements that they are hearing, that especially when it is an explainable AI system that can explain why something is supported or not supported, that people tend to change their opinions, basically, or agree with the system when they hear these statements. They also find them to be more reasonable, the statements, when the system says they are supported. And people are also more willing to agree or to support an organization that relates to that statement that they just heard, say a political organization or whatever it is. So we think it is very interesting to look at this whole space of to what extent can AI systems that operate like this in real time influence a person in their real-time thinking, and to what extent are people maybe too willing to change their opinions based on what the AI system is doing. So we've done some similar experiments recently also, where the system actually is not a benevolent system, but tries to influence the user in a way that isn't basically based in explanations, to see to what extent people become influenced, and how we should be thinking about this whole future, where I think increasingly we will be relying on external AI systems like this to help us make decisions of all sorts. Communication, I think this is the last application area that I'll talk about. We think that there's a lot of opportunity for systems to help people become better communicators, and especially become more empathetic communicators. So we have been experimenting with both different forms of affect recognition, either recognizing affective state from voice analysis, as well as recognizing affect from EDA or electrodermal activity. And we believe that it is an interesting proposition to basically give people insight into how another person is reacting emotionally to what that person is saying. So you don't look at your own data, but you actually look at the data of the other person. This may be useful for couples, for example, to understand better when something you say to your spouse is upsetting your spouse, or for a doctor-patient relationship where a doctor should learn to show a lot of empathy for their patients and should learn to read the emotions of their patients, because doctors who show more empathy end up having better outcomes in terms of even when they prescribe the exact same treatment as doctors who do not show much empathy in their method of communication. So in this system, we actually published already the version based on electrodermal activity, where the wearable version, where basically two people, a romantic couple, were asked to have difficult conversations about difficult topics. And we measured their electrodermal activity in real time, which is really a sense of how excited the person is. But it can be positively excited or negatively. So you really only know the arousal level, it's called, and not the valence, whether it's positive or negative. So we had them engage in these sensitive conversations, and we conveyed to the other person when the electrodermal activity was picking up some arousal or excitement, positive or negative, in the other in the conversation partner, basically. And what we showed is that when we gave people this biofeedback, they actually experienced an increased level of attention, or demonstrated an increased level of attention and awareness of the other person and of themselves. So we looked, for example, at whether people would ask questions like, what do you mean? And so on. And more questions were asked when people received this feedback about how the other person was emotionally responding. They also used more words that are perceptual words like feel and see and hear. And they also use the words we more, and us versus I and me, as well as using more social words like friend, buddies, talk, mate, etc. So we believe that there's a lot of potential for devices like this that analyze this information in real time and convey this information in real time to change how much empathy a person shows towards a conversation partner. So in summary, I think that new wearable devices can help us grow and thrive. And by using sensor data and AI techniques, we can basically provide real-time support for important cognitive skills such as creativity, attention, communication, emotion regulation, and more. I didn't show you all of these, but we have several projects in the other areas as well. I want to just conclude by saying a few words about the ethics of our or the ethics principles that we try to abide by, because of course, in all of this work, we are collecting a lot of sensitive data about people, about people's internal state, how they are feeling, how they are thinking, what their brain is doing, their attention, and more. And our philosophy is to basically, or our ultimate goal is to enhance people's quality of life by translating brain and behavioral science for real-world use, specifically in a way so as to help people understand themselves and grow and improve their ways in which they do things. So the goal is really to help people understand and develop and learn. We try to be very involved in critical conversations about this work because we want to try to do all of this work safely. We design with target users, together with target users, and the goal is always to enable people to learn something rather than forcing them to use something. We want to teach them certain skills and ultimately make them not dependent on the technology. The goal is really for people to learn, for example, how to pay attention to how a conversation partner is responding rather than have to rely on a machine to translate that for you. And last but not least, we try to keep all the data that we collect private by doing a lot of the processing locally rather than remotely. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation, and I am happy to answer some questions now. I hope I didn't take too long.
First of all, no, I think it was you took exactly what we had. Thank you again. I first would like to say thank you for the audience. We had quite a lot of people, very diverse and international audience. We have people from many cities in Brazil: Campinas, Porto Alegre, São Carlos, Recife, São José dos Campos, Rio, Natal. We have people from Spain, Santiago de Compostela, from Mountain View, from Sweden, from Germany in Germany. I barely can say the name of the city, but thank you all. I think that sort of shows that in the opportunities that sort of are opened by the pandemic in some ways.
Location doesn't matter anymore.
I want to start saying one of the reasons I invited you to this presentation, to this AI seminar, was exactly because your work looks more into how to make people more intelligent using machines than make machine more intelligent with human data, which is where we are. I think sometimes I think it's artificial human intelligence, what you're doing. I think it's fascinating.
Yes.
But I will start with one question that we make to all people in this seminar, and it has to do with the current world we are in. And you have been involved with AI research and HCI research for a long time. And how do you think this pandemic, this year, this 2020 has changed that research, both in terms of the field and your perspective in your own research?
Yeah, so indeed, I mean, for us, there was a lot of impact because a lot of our work, especially the work I shared today, is about wearable computers. And suddenly we were no longer able to do human subject experiments and bring people to the lab, or we weren't even able to go into the lab ourselves to do work. So we have shifted a lot of our work to thinking of remote use cases. For example, the project that I showed about learning to develop empathy and learning to read a conversation partner, we shifted that whole project to an online version, basically, so that it could be used in a Zoom setting or a setting like today, where maybe instead of just seeing everybody's comments, I could see people's emotional reactions, and when they were spiking because I said something outrageous or something they didn't agree with, and so on. So we have been looking more at remote use cases, basically. And so I would say a lot of the research has shifted, at least temporarily, in that direction. Yeah. But as a researcher, I find that there are a lot of advantages as well. The fact that we no longer feel like we have to get together physically to talk about something. So I gave a talk in Germany earlier or last week. I'm giving a talk in Brazil today. You can get all these wonderful experts from all over the world to just show up and give a guest lecture in your courses and so on. So it's actually created a lot of opportunities as well, which I hope we will continue to make use of once we all have, or most of us, get the vaccine. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that happens soon. So I have some interesting questions. I'm going to start with one from Philippe Thomet. Thank you. And the question he asks is, we are in this moment where there's a lot of obscurantisms and hoax and pseudoscience, anti-vaxxers. And how do you think this your project related to this kind of relationship and this moment, this special moment we are in?
Yeah, so that, well, I think indeed there's a lot of information out there is not truthful. I mean, it's not representative of the truth. And this is actually one of the reasons that we were inspired to create that Wearable Reasoner project. The goal there really was to help people with media literacy, basically. I just in general think that there's such a wonderful opportunity to help people with all sorts of things that we have to learn. Maybe some of us learn it later in life than others, but things like being skeptical about your sources or thinking about what is said or how something is presented and so on. I think there's an enormous opportunity for AI systems like the ones that I've shown, and we really have only started touching on this topic, to really, in the moment, assist a user and help a user to be more critical, basically, and to maybe learn in the moment from real-world examples. When we think about it, I mean, I think that it used to be the case that people would learn from a master. Before we started having schools, schools are actually not that old. The phenomenon of schools is not that old. It's not even 200 years old. Before that, people would be with a master, and you would always have that master there and to help you from all the real world situations that you are in and help you look at them differently and learn about them in the moment. And then we shifted to creating schools where people are supposed to like do all the learning, and then they're supposed to do all the applying their knowledge after, when they're done with school. And that just seems wrong. I think that with wearable technologies, there is an opportunity now to just have people learn in real life, in the real world. And it is something that we should explore more, I think. Having smart companions that are with a child or with an adult and that can teach you things in the moment, can teach you a language, for example, in the moment rather than in a language class, or can teach you physics while you're throwing around a ball, or can teach you about reasoning strategies and being skeptical about things that you hear when you are hearing them. And so that has always been sort of an approach that I am very excited about, and that I feel we has so much potential, and we've really only recently started sort of experimenting with that. Yeah.
No, it's well, we all know it's a very difficult moment. So, and it's not easy to convince people to believe in facts. But sort of switching and focusing on one of the things you mentioned, the device helping decision making, which sort of related to this. Paula Olivio said, do you see this kind of device being used in real-time applications, especially safety critical apps? What would be the constraints in those situations?
I think we have to understand better. I feel that a lot of the research, for example, in using artificial intelligence, for example, to make medical diagnosis or help a doctor make a medical diagnosis, I feel like we're very focused on the algorithms and maybe having them explain themselves and so on. But ultimately, we have to look at the combined system of the person and the AI and whether the solutions that they come up with are better. We shouldn't just look at the AI system and evaluate the accuracy of the AI system. It's really about ultimately what the doctor does together with that AI system. And I think that there could be a lot of very weird types of interactions there where maybe if the system is wrong, it may still influence the doctor in a negative way. And so I think it's important that we look a little bit more at people and people's behavior and people's thinking, because ultimately people are fairly irrational. While in a lot of our work that we do in AI and so on, we sort of assume that people are rational and rational thinkers who are not that easy to influence and so on. But I think that is very wrong. So we need more work that is about that brings human-computer interaction together with artificial intelligence technology to look at how a person plus an AI, how we can best sort of integrate those two and make sure so that to optimize the outcomes of the integrated system, the combined system.
Yes, well, just one thing that I found interesting is that, I mean, if you look at your work in the 90s, it's a lot about social in some ways too. And now I look at this very much individual inside the individual. I was wondering, I mean, why do you think this switch, or do you think yourself going back to that, to a more social? What do you think about this, which sort of related to what you're saying, sorry.
Yeah. I think that indeed we're starting with one point. There's just so much low-hanging fruit, and definitely we are doing some things that are related to that I showed, enhancing communication and so on. But ultimately, indeed, we'll look at much larger groups of people and how they can make smart decisions and how you can have sort of entire systems of people and smart machines that ultimately can sort of be more effective. Yeah, so I think eventually I'll bring that older work back to what we're doing.
And we have a question related to that from Murilo Batista, and he is wondering if technology, especially the empathy systems you mentioned, could be used for autistic children, people, if you have looked into that.
Great idea. We have some work on autism, but not this particular application. But I know there has been research, and unfortunately, I can't think of the name right now, but it should be fairly easy to find. There is research on using augmented reality to help autistic children with recognizing facial expressions and reactions of the people around them, basically. Really also as a real world training type of device. So that work is very much in line with sort of the types of things that we are trying to do, where you can help the child not just in their 1 hour therapy session or something with their therapist every week, but instead there can be a wearable system that can help them in their real world interactions with learning this skill. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was looking to that. I say, well, maybe that could help me to connect with my teenager son in many ways. But that's a very hard problem. Very hard empathy problem. Right? We have a
or
Sergey.
maybe he needs it more than you.
Well, it's complicated. We have Sergey from Mountain View said, and here's a more sort of technical question, but I think it's interesting. Is, I mean, a lot of our results use hardware, which is, I don't think it's medical grade, and how much do you think that may affect your results, or do you think it's a real issue, or we can handle?
I don't think it's much of an issue, actually. I think that the systems are good enough these days. Increasingly, we have commercial systems as well, like the Fitbit now gives you EDA as well. I mean, before that we had the Empatica, or we still have the Empatica bracelet, which is a commercial device that gives you EDA at a price point. For Empatica, it's still relatively high, but much lower than any of the sort of really professional types of hardware that were previously used in studies. So a big motivation for us is to make all of these systems that do, for example, sleep staging and so on, make that all available at a much lower price point so that we can make more experiments possible. For example, the Dormio system that I talked about is being used by Boston College, Harvard is using it, Duke University is using it, University of Chicago is using it. They're all using it because it's so much cheaper and can be used even in home settings rather than in like expensive sleep labs to do some of these experiments. So a big motivation for us is to enable the research community with devices that maybe are not FDA approved or whatever, but that are good enough and that we have tested to verify that the signal is good enough to be able to do these types of studies. Yeah.
No, I found that whole set of experiments fascinating, partially because I have lucid dreams, and so I said, wow, maybe now I can control them better. It's that kind of thing that it's a really amazing state, I have to say. There's another question from Philippe Tomé, and it has to do with, do you think this kind of devices and system you're building will be part of a psychiatry and psychology as tools of their trade in the future? And of course, I mean, they have other, but do you see that? Do you get positive response from psychiatrists and psychologists?
I've talked to some, not a lot of them, but yes, I think people are very excited about this potential. And I'm not the only one who is working on this whole vision. For example, Tom Insel, he was the head of the National Institute for Mental Health, or either the National Institute of Health. And then he went to Google, actually, and now he has his own company that basically is already doing something like this. They track people's use of their phones and simple things like how you type, the speed, etc., as well as other things like frequency of use of the phone and so on. And that information is tracked and analyzed. And if there are significant changes in a person's behavior, it is relayed or conveyed to the person's therapist. And this is specifically for people that have depressive episodes. And so the system can basically alert the therapist that maybe the person is sliding into a depressive state, and can then reach out to, for example, help the person with some strategies. Yeah. So I think that indeed, this type of technology, personally, I think it will be incredibly useful for enabling therapists, psychiatrists, and so on to help people more in the moment when they need it. For example, I mean, imagine somebody who has anger outbursts. I am sure you can detect that based on physiological data, and that at that moment, maybe your therapist can give you a call, or can and can help you and remind you of sort of what the strategies are that you should sort of pursue at that moment to calm yourself down. So yes, I think there's tremendous potential for this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I wish sometimes my wife had called me when I was in one of those moments. Say, calm down, go easy. It's all right. We have, if you don't mind, 2 more questions. I know you're probably it's tiring too, especially even more in a video conference. It seems to me that you're giving a talk in a video conference, you get even more. So if you could have 2 more questions. One is from Mariela. That she was looking into the memorization technique and the system you showed, and how that is, if you have looked into how to escalate that, what kind of maybe more complex things or more useful things besides who won Super Bowl. Yeah.
So we have, unfortunately, that student did not continue for PhD, but so we did that one experiment to show the potential, but we have not done additional experiments. However, one of the ways we were inspired was by reading a book by Joshua Foer, is his name, and he looked at this whole technique of the memory palace, and that's really ultimately the sort of ancient technique that our solution is based on. So even already the Greeks and Romans in ancient times used this technique of the memory palace, where if they had to give a long speech, they would sort of mentally associate parts of the speech with a big palace and a walk through that palace. And you can then just mentally sort of think, where am I in the palace, to remember, like, oh, now I have to talk about this part of my speech. So that's where the technique originally comes from. And memory champions, there's these memory championships where people will basically like memorize 5 decks of cards randomly shuffled, which is, I mean, a huge number of random facts. And they do that using techniques like this, but they train themselves to do it in their heads without basically using augmented reality and as you are walking, say, from one place to another along a familiar route. So they actually learn to do this in their heads, but they also use routes like that in their mind and attach information to these routes to remember these sets of facts. So there's a very impressive sort of results that at least those memory champions can obtain with this technique. Yeah,
that's amazing. One last question. Although I would say it's a question from Amos. It's sort of a hard question, but let's close with one, which is an ethical question. And I think it has to do with the have or the future have or have nots in terms of access to these devices. So how do you see this kind of issue coming up? And I'm sure you have thought how could, as a society, mitigate this and provide equal access to people to augmentation, to mind augmentation.
So to me, all of this is about the future of learning, how we learn not just facts, but how we learn to be productive people in society, who can communicate empathetically and so on. And so I think that as a technology, all of these things that we do are cheap. It can really, all of it can run on a future version of your cell phone and the hearing buds that you have in your ears right now, for example. So I don't think these technologies are expensive, and cell phones or smartphones are already a technology that people invest in, even the people who have the least. So I think that ultimately this actually improves access rather than creating more of a distinction between the haves and the have-nots. Right now, you got to come to MIT for your studies, for example, Claudio. But very few people get to come to MIT and enjoy that education. And while if you make things available, new types of learning experiences via wearable devices at price points of current smartphones, it ultimately can reach a much, much bigger audience. And it ultimately is democratizing all of this more, I think, than what is the case today.
Okay. No, I think it's, again, I think what you're doing is fascinating, almost as always. I always thought your work is really mind-provoking and really brave in exploring the possibilities of the present to the future. I think for this, in the context of this seminar, where we're really going to look into different perspectives into the AI, not try to different points of view, different approach. I think it was an absolutely great talk. I'd like to thank you again for that. Unfortunately, it's hard to have applause in this situation, but I will do in the name of more than 80 people who watched this presentation. For the people watching, please follow us in our in the links we have, so you know the coming talks and our activities of the center. As I said, the center is starting its activities. We are a joint project of IBM, FAPESP, and the University of São Paulo. We want to do high-level artificial intelligence research in Brazil, and also to be very active in terms of putting those ideas out, debating, understanding the ethical issues and the impact in society. Thank you, everyone, again. Thank you to the people who helped us in the background. Thank you to the audience, and especially thank you, Pattie. It's always a pleasure to listen to you and see what you're doing.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you to all.